Hi, I'm Ryan Hunter, and this is Kalispell Connections, a program where I interview community leaders about issues important to the community. And with me today is Kacy Howard, the Executive Director of the Chute Foundation. Hi, Kacy.
Hi, Ryan. How are you?
Good. Thanks for joining us today. I guess I want to start with just the basics. Who was Chute, and what is the Chute Foundation?
Awesome. Thanks, Ryan. Thanks so much for having us today. Nate Chute was a local kid. He grew up in Whitefish. He was a young man who was very involved in sports and organizations and did well at school, and was really not somebody that, when we typically think about somebody who might be struggling with mental health issues or suicidality, who we would maybe classify as a person at risk. However, when you look deeper, Nate did show some of those risk signs that we now know better. And the Nate Chute Foundation was founded in 1999 after his death, essentially through his family's call to action, his family and friends' call to action to ensure that other people didn't have to feel that sense of really tragic loss. So for now 20 years, the Nate Chute Foundation has been active in the Flathead Valley primarily, working in schools and with businesses and community organizations to provide education and training on what to look for and what to do and how to help, but also as a community connector for helping people find resources, broadening our understanding of suicide as a problem in the state of Montana and what we're doing to help fix it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's such important work. And I know Montana has one of the highest suicide rates in the country. Why is that? Why do you think Montana struggles so much with this problem?
Boy, that's the question, isn't it? Ultimately, our answer for that is one that suicide is a really complex issue. It's complicated, and there's never really one single answer. Almost always there is a mental health component to suicidality, but that could range from depression that's biological depression that is a result of chemical deficiencies in the brain, but it could also be environmental depression resulting from challenging situations in life. I just forgot the question.
No, just Montana in general,
Thank you.
Why is Montana struggling so much?
Thank you. So, so culturally is what we really talk about, is that we are a state that has some access problems to services just because the rural nature of our state. But also there's a lot of stigma around getting help for depression or mental health issues because sometimes it's viewed as a weakness. Montana will mention that we have high correlational rates of substance abuse with suicidality, so using substances as a means of coping. But also things like the fact that we have high populations of veterans and American Indians and middle-aged white men, and those we know are all really high-risk populations. And then there's a component too about our weather, lack of vitamin D and the impact that that can have on our systems. And there's some new research that is not totally fleshed out yet, but potentially about elevation, about how do our brains process oxygen at higher levels of elevation? How do we respond to traditional treatments like SSRIs or antidepressants? So all of those things combining, we talk about it as a cultural problem in Montana. And again, it's complex.
Mm-hmm.
There's never really a good answer to that why question. But I think in Montana, some things that we can do are look at access to care or treatment, also access to substances and how we're treating those things, and access to lethal means. Montana is a gun-owning state. We're great about gun safety. That's all awesome. But it also means that many homes have very lethal means, and so people have more availability and access to those.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so one of the topics I was interested in exploring as well is the stay-at-home order and this pandemic. I've been reading a lot about how there's concern in the mental health community about the impact this will have, the social isolation. I'm wondering what your thoughts are about what impact that will have and whether or not you're seeing any of that locally.
Yeah, we are already starting to see some of it through increased calls to crisis lines, which I guess in some ways is maybe a good thing that people are reaching out for help, but it also tells us that a lot more people are struggling. We have experienced some suicides here locally during the stay-at-home order, so we know that it's happening. And I think as far as the broader impact of this all goes, the sort of stressful life circumstances that we talk about as risk factors for people, things like job loss, financial insecurity, lack of freedom, or fear of punishment, those things are sort of a universal experience right now. Where in the, before COVID-19, those things are a little bit more isolated. So just the fact that so many of us are experiencing these really stressful ongoing factors in our lives is going to potentially bring up risk factor. There's also, so you see studies about the percentage of alcohol sales going up, right? So this idea of alcohol is coping. Honestly, Ryan, what I'm most concerned about now during people being more isolated is concerning. And we also have to be really creative about how we reach out. But what I worry about is people who already struggle with mental health issues, depression specifically, maybe anxiety as well. As the world starts to turn again and people start to return to normal, that's going to be challenging for those people who are stuck in the throes of their mental health challenges, right? Because and it happens in springtime anyway. We see an increase in suicide in springtime because people start to come out and they start to move and we kind of come out of our hibernation. And that can be really difficult for somebody yearning to come out and just not being able to. So in some ways, I'm more concerned about as we come out of this than as I was while we're in it. But like I said, we're seeing the numbers already start to rise.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Mhm.
And then, so what are the signs that people should look for in their friends, loved ones, in terms of suicide thoughts?
Yeah. Well, essentially, you're looking for any sort of negative change in behavior. So something that's atypical for that person. Um, we talk about risk factors, like I just mentioned, those things like job loss or mental health issues or other contributing factors. What warning signs are really those red light things that we need to stop and take a look at. So those are going to be people talking about death or dying, or posting about it, or writing things about that is going to be obviously a huge red flag. But also any sort of plans for getting their affairs in order. So things like planning for childcare or pet care or getting a will together. Those sort of things are big red flags. Increases in substance abuse or any kind of high risk behavior can be a huge warning sign for us. And that might be how somebody drives, how they interact, those sorts of things. But really, like I said, any negative change in behavior. And one thing that people don't often know is that in regard to moods, because we think of depression as so often correlating to suicide, we think of depression as kind of sad and sullen, but depression often comes out as really irritable and agitated too. So that's something to look for as well, is that people that just all of a sudden really have a short fuse and have big reactions to situations that typically they might be able to handle a little bit better. Of course, we're going to look for things like giving away prized possessions, um, and other sort of means of kind of saying goodbye. But ultimately, the biggest piece is that anytime somebody's talking about death, dying, or suicide, whether directly or indirectly, we need to be asking them about that and to not be afraid to ask about that.
Mhm. Yeah, and so that, I guess, gets to my next question. I think for a lot of us, we struggle with this. And, I think a lot of people have known at one point or another somebody who, is considering suicide, and just that struggle of how do you respond? You don't want to make it worse. You don't want to, I think a lot of people have this fear around talking to somebody about that. So it's a scary subject, right? And so
Mhm.
that's a real challenge for those of us who are loved ones or neighbors or friends to respond to that person who's thinking about suicide. What's the recommendation? How should people respond?
Mhm. Well, first, Ryan, I mean, it is scary, right? Even for me, somebody who's a professional and an expert, if you will, in this field, it's not easy to do. But what I would first say is that you should never be afraid to ask directly about suicide. And in fact, it's recommended. If you are thinking that it might be a possibility, it's likely that it's crossed that person's mind as well. We're never going to increase risk by asking about suicidality. The best situation that can come is we find the opportunity to get somebody connected with help. The worst is that they say no, and then we kind of move on and say, I care enough about you to ask. But essentially, it's about asking the question, finding out where they are, and checking in with them. Acknowledging the signs that you see is really important. Being able to make it tangible. So notice, I know you haven't been yourself lately? I wanted to say something about you haven't been at a pickup basketball league lately, but nobody has. So we have to ask that question a little differently, right? But just noticing those signs and communicating that to the person you love. So that's that first step, acknowledging what's happening for them and asking directly if they've had thoughts of hurting themselves. Um, and ask that question in whatever way feels most comfortable for you. The only wrong way to ask about suicide is to say something like, "You are not suicidal, are you?" Or "You wouldn't do anything stupid, would you?" Because those statements have judgment in them. They are eliciting a response of no, and they're kind of communicating to that person that maybe we're not a very safe person to talk to about this. So we want to make sure that when we do ask about suicide, whether you say, "Have you thought about suicide? Are you thinking about killing yourself? Do you wish sometimes that you were dead?" Whatever way feels good to you to ask about it, know that it's safe. The second step would be just to demonstrate care. Let them know that we're here for them, that we want to help them, that we love them, that we're going to be with them through every step of this to get them help and support. What you don't want to do is try to fix it. We're not trying to minimize their feelings. We don't, we really want to make them feel valid. So if you come to me and say, "Yeah, I have thought about suicide. Life is hard right now. I lost my job. My wife and I are fighting," whatever, my response shouldn't be, "Well, it's all going to get better when this is over." Because what I've essentially just told you is that, like, what you're feeling isn't all that valid, because I know there's a solution. And somebody who's struggling with suicidality isn't going to be able to see that solution. So our response should just be, "That's hard. I want to help you. What can I do for you?" And then the final step is to get them connected with some help. So whether that is calling the national crisis lines, the phone number, or the text crisis line, the phone number is 1-800-273-TALK or 8255. And the text line is 741-741. Those are both 24/7, totally free and totally confidential. And contrary to what sometimes people believe about those resources, they're not just going to call the police, right? Those are trained crisis counselors whose job it is to talk you to a safe place and to help you make a plan to stay safe. So those are really important resources for people to be aware of and to use. And also, as somebody who's worried about a friend, a neighbor, a loved one, I can call and say, "Hey, talk me through this. I'm worried about my friend. How should I ask about this?" So those aren't always just crisis moments. That is a really, really fantastic resource for all of us to use. So it's asking and acknowledge, it's care, and then get them connected to some help. Outside of those crisis lines, the Nate Chute Foundation is available to help connect people to resources or talk through what might be appropriate avenues to seek help. Of course, if there is a very acute emergency, we need to be engaging 911 and getting law enforcement and potentially visiting the ER to get somebody to a safe place.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think that's so important that that point about the numbers, not just for the people considering suicide, but even people want to talk about it if they know somebody. That's
Yeah.
that's important to know. And
Yeah.
how do people get in touch with the Nate Chute Foundation if they want?
You can email us at info@natechutefoundation.org, or our website, natechutefoundation.org, or our phone number is 406-720-2521.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Kacy. That's wonderful information, and you guys do great work. And you're tackling a tough problem in our state, in our community, and I wish you the best of luck moving forward.
Thank you so much for having us, Ryan. Really appreciate the conversation.
All right, thank you.